I'd like to speak for a few minutes about the potential benefit of establishing a new type of research facility that is specifically designed to explore the nature, the origins, the potentials of consciousness. More than a century ago, the great pioneer of American psychology, William James, established the first experimental psychology research facility in North America at Harvard University. It was also a neuroscience facility. They're studying the brain. And so he initiated this, but the same person, William James, proposed that the study of the mind should proceed in a threefold fashion. That mental events, subjective experience of all kinds, of thoughts, emotions, mental imagery, dreams, and so forth, should be studied indirectly by studying behavior, which then is kind of comfortable because we're studying objective, physical, quantifiable phenomena. The mind, this whole array of mental events, should be studied indirectly by studying the neural correlates, the neural mechanisms that help to give rise to subjective experience. So sound, illuminating inferences can be drawn by studying the brain. And over the more than a century since he suggested this strategy, there have been great strides, much progress, insights into the nature of the mind, roughly over the last century, since 1910, studying behavior, so behavioral psychology. Many valuable insights. Likewise, more recently, many of the bold insights from the neurosciences have been made through advancing technology and so forth. But William James suggested that the study of the mind, we should proceed in a third fashion as well, and this is in a way the most traditional mode of inquiry of the natural sciences, and that is for every other field of the natural sciences. The primary mode of inquiry is to observe the phenomena you're trying to understand with as much sophistication and rigor as you possibly can. So whether it's elementary particles or whether it's galaxies, electron microscope or a Hubble telescope, or whatever in between, the great triumphs of science have inevitably proceeded together with very precise, replicable observations of the phenomena you're seeking to understand. And so he said, if we're really seeking to understand the nature of subjective experience, states of consciousness, mental processes, then, like all other branches of natural science, we should devise sophisticated, refined means for observing the phenomena themselves. Now, the reality of the matter at his time and still to this day is that all subjective experience is completely invisible to all scientific modes of measurement. There are no instruments, whether EEG, MRI, or anything else, that is capable of directly observing such mental phenomena as emotions, dreams, thoughts, memories, or any other subjective experience whatsoever. The good news is that such subjective experiences can be directly observed, but only by means of introspection. That is, awareness can directly observe dreams, emotions. We know these immediately. So he suggested that introspection be invited into the scientific method, being invited into scientific inquiry as a legitimate, replicable, authentic mode of inquiry that needs to be refined. And that suggestion has been almost universally ignored by the community of mind scientists, psychologists, neuroscientists. It's the missing factor. It is with mental awareness alone that we can directly observe non-physical phenomena. The scientific method, the whole array of science, from cosmology to botany to elementary particle physics, all of the branches of science are all embracing systems of measurement, modes of inquiry that can detect physical, quantifiable, objective phenomena with tremendous success. But mental experience, such as mental images, discursive thoughts, dreams, and so forth, are not physical. They have no physical attributes whatsoever. They're not objective. You can't see them out there in the world. You don't see them in the brain or anywhere else. And they're not quantifiable. There's no little system of measurement that can click off, the quanta of the magnitude of a thought, for example. So with introspection, these can be observed, and this is the great lacuna in the scientific study of the mind. That's the bad news, and the good news is exactly where the mind sciences have a deficit, an absence, a limitation. This is the great strength of the contemplative traditions of the world, of recognizing the value of first-person observation of mental phenomena, and not only recognizing the value, but there are millennia of contemplatives who have developed and refined extremely rigorous sophisticated means of refining attention so that when we make observations, they are valid, they are replicable, they can be put to the test of ever more refined experience. And so the proposal here is to create something that I think William James envisioned but never happened. And that would be a research facility that would emphasize, first, foremost, and always, as William James said, the direct first-person observation of mental phenomena, states of consciousness, origins of consciousness, potentials of consciousness. This would be embraced scientifically, and it would be conjoined with the strengths of the modern mind sciences, and that is through interviewing people, through studying behavior, through studying brain correlates. That this would not be seen as a competition, but they would be gathering together in a mutually complementary fashion, the first person, the behavioral, and the neuroscientific, and they would all then complement each other. For this, then, we need people who are professionally trained as contemplatives, who are taking contemplative training every bit as seriously as neuroscientists take the study of the brain, 4 years of undergraduate, 4, 6, 8 years of graduate studies, postdoc, and likewise professional psychologists, and like with astronomers, botanists, medical doctors, and so forth, taking professionally the contemplative study of the mind through rigorous sustained training. We could call this a consciousness research institute or center. We could call it a contemplative laboratory. We could call it a contemplative observatory. But a place where people who are strongly motivated could come to dedicate their lives, at least a year, 5, 10, 15 years, to training their minds, refining their attention skills, and then applying this refined introspection to exploring the very nature of consciousness, multiple dimensions of consciousness. Do it in ways that are replicable. So you have multiple people doing it and seeing whether their experiences correspond to each other, and then finding the behavioral correlates or expressions, the neural correlates, invite them all to the party. So there's no winners and losers here. Everybody wins by drawing from the wisdom, the insights, the methodologies of ancient traditions combined with and integrated with modern methodologies, views, insights, to have for the first time a truly three-dimensional understanding of the mind. Behavior is very important. The behavioral expressions, the neural correlates, very important, no debate. But what William James was pleading for, and which was ignored for now a century, was let psychology be truly natural science. Let us treat the mind like every other natural phenomenon and seek to understand it by observing it directly with as much refinement, sophistication, precision as we possibly can. So a contemplative observatory, creating individual labs called meditation huts, where people will go in for a year, 5, 10, 15 years of rigorous, sustained training and investigation, monitored wherever it seems feasible and valuable by behavioral scientists, by neuroscientists, but treating the contemplatives for the first time as researchers in their own right. There's a lot now, over the last 10, 15 years, there's a lot of very good scientific research on meditation. It's getting more mainstream. Finer and finer scientists with greater and greater reputations are becoming involved, bringing the full might of their laboratories, their funding, and so forth. And without exception, to the best of my knowledge, the meditators are treated as subjects. And that is, they're providing data for the professionals to analyze and for the professionals to write their papers. Who the contemplatives were is never mentioned. Even who the person guiding the meditation, the meditators, the meditation teacher, often never mentioned. Who cares? The people are professionals or the scientists, and they're studying the data, the subjects, the objects of meditators. That's very limited, because there's an implicit assumption there that the meditators themselves aren't making any discoveries at all. They're just having experiences. Whereas the scientists are studying data, getting hard quantitative data about the brain states and the behavior and the verbal reports of the meditators. That's all grist for the mill. But what's being ignored here is the people making the primary discoveries are the people actually observing the mind. Why should that seem so odd? And so finally, giving some respect where respect is profoundly due. When we have Tibetan yogis, Chinese, Burmese, Thai, Sri Lankan yogis who are spending 10, 15, 20 years investigating the mind, really, we might consider the possibility maybe they're making discoveries and not simply indoctrinating themselves in some type of dogma. And so to invite contemplatives as professionals to the table, and so we have professionally trained contemplatives together with professionally trained psychologists and neuroscientists, all with mutual respect, all recognizing that no one of these disciplines has a monopoly. No one speaks with a unique voice of authority to drown out the other two. And the contemplatives themselves are making discoveries. They may be replicated. And those insights into mental phenomena themselves, which are invisible to people studying just behavior and studying brain, they may contribute enormously to our scientific, our human understanding of consciousness, its origins, and its potentials. So, as far as I know, there is no such laboratory, observatory, or research center anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. I would love to see one here. I live in Santa Barbara. Why not in this area? It's a nice neighborhood. And create an environment, create a contemplative research facility of that sort to explore the very nature of consciousness in a way that is not metaphysically biased. And whenever we approach the study of consciousness with the assumption that, the unquestioned assumption that, consciousness is simply a function, an emergent property of the brain, or is equivalent to neuronal activity, this is metaphysically laden, biased research. And it does not serve the scientific community or anyone else well. We should apply Occam's razor here, shave off all of these untested, uncorroborated metaphysical assumptions, all of them materialistic in nature, and say, we don't know. With an open mind, investigate the phenomena themselves, and see if we can not only understand the nature of consciousness, but its potentials, not only cognitively, but what are our inner resources for finding a deeper sense of fulfillment, of meaning, of happiness, tapping into the inner resources of empathy, of loving kindness, of compassion, tapping into the very wellspring of virtue, and discovering through our own experience, if there are any limits, where are they? If there are no limits, let's discover that. Is there continuity of consciousness beyond death, or is there not? Is there consciousness prior to this life, or is there not? As long as you're studying just brain and behavior, you're simply riding on your assumptions. And you'll never get any exceptions because you're locked into a materialistic framework that will not allow any non-materialistic data in. If you're studying consciousness itself, which has no material or physical attributes, perhaps you may discover dimensions of consciousness that are always beyond the scope of behavioral and neuroscientific studies because they are locked into the parameters of the physical and the material. But if you observe consciousness itself, which is neither physical nor material, you may discover the actual origins and nature of consciousness in ways that can be replicable, that can be accepted by anyone, whether they are Buddhist, not Buddhist, religious or not religious, because the empirical evidence is so compelling. This is what William James proposed, that there could be a true science of first-person experience that would be so compelling that regardless of your background, you would be forced to some conclusions by the empirical evidence, which is what science has happily been doing for us, for humanity, for 400 years. The evidence got so compelling that we can no longer think of the earth as being the center of the universe. The evidence was so compelling that we can no longer think of species being static. The evidence being so compelling that we can no longer think of consciousness being locked into the skull as a mere emergent property, a function of brain activity. If that's true, it should be demonstrated and not simply be assumed. If it's not true, then we need non-materialistic methods to discover non-material attributes of consciousness. So, a contemplative observatory, I think the time is ripe for people with open minds, willing to challenge their own most cherished assumptions and venture into the very space of the mind, explore its multiple dimensions. And therefore, I'd like to call this a contemplative observatory to open up the expanse of consciousness. So if you're interested, let's contribute to this vision and draw it from the realm of imagination into the realm of actuality, so it actually does some good.